Let's get this underway, fellas. Hey guys. Okay. Let's talk about bibs. To be totally honest with you, I have a couple different ways we could do this. And I worry I've chosen the worst one, but because it's going to be the least organized, okay? But it's sort of out of necessity, and it springs from this. It struck me very recently, like probably in the past 24 hours or so, that enough of you, I can't say everybody, I don't know, but enough of you aren't super confident in either what the paper is or what the bibs are supposed to be. So that's my goal today. And look, there can be all kinds of reasons for that. So that is kind of what I'm getting at with this may be disorganized at times. I want to start with questions, actually. As we do this first part, save us a little bit of time, I sent you emails like I always do for workshop. There's a student example in there that we may get to. If you could go ahead and open that up just in your own moment, I'm going to do the same. But I'm curious, to begin with, I guess we'll start with the paper. Specifically the paper. Does anybody have any questions about how that's meant to work or anything like that? Yes. We do chess, please. Just so other people hear you.
Okay. At the beginning, whenever we started this new unit, you told us that there was going to be like 2 ways to format your.
Yes.
Which way was it? The way wherever you like sort out each topic, like each paragraph has a main idea, and that main idea you influence your 4 sources into it, or was it
that
way?
one?
Okay.
Well, all right. So this is a good question. This is a good one to start with. Generally speaking, many of you will want to do the one I don't want you to do, which is this body paragraph is all about this text. This body paragraph is all about this other text. The reason I tell you not to do that, even though in some ways it is easier, it's harder to do well on the paper, okay? And the reason for that is the whole point of the paper is to get these texts talking to each other, right? Vonnegut, Jarvis, the other 2. You don't have to get them all in every paragraph, like that would be crazy, but you need to have a few in every paragraph. Because otherwise, if you kind of silo them off, then it's really the sentences in between, like the transitional sentences, where you do all that work. And that's really hard to do well. I've seen it done, but it's difficult. So the way I talk about it, which is what you described, say your first body paragraph, you talk about Vonnegut, you have a quotation from Jarvis that you connect, and maybe you have one other source that you're like, they also talk about this idea, and here's how. First body paragraph. Second body paragraph, different idea. Maybe I don't use Vonnegut at all, but maybe I start with Jarvis, a whole other sort, right? You move through your paper with ideas rather than texts. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good question to start us off. Other questions about the paper? Yes, ma'am.
Does one of the ideas have to be masculinity, or does it?
No.
Okay.
It can be. So I understand, because I had that question at the end of our last class after you guys left, and I was like, damn it, I wish you'd asked everybody was here. When I put something on a prompt, and I know some teachers treat this differently, so that's why the question exists. When I put something on the prompt, it's a suggestion. It's trying to give you ideas. So you could for sure talk about that. Vonnegut talks about it a lot. It's in Jarvis a bit. Some of the sources you'll find about Vonnegut or Slaughterhouse-Five or War are all about masculinity. So you could for sure do that, but you do not have to. I'm just trying to kind of get the wheels turning, you know? Okay, another good question. Any other questions about the paper? Okay. Questions about the bib? Here and then back there.
Okay, so like, you know how we were supposed to do like the first 2 and it's due today?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm so confused on like what
Okay.
you want from us. Like,
Okay.
you want the first one is over the book, right? And then the second one over the article or whatever. But like, do you want us to like connect them, keep them separate? Like, how do you want us to go about that?
What do you? I'll explain what I want, and then if that doesn't, then we'll take another swing. Okay. When it comes to the bibs, again, there are 4. 2 of them are about sources I gave you. So Vonnegut, Jarvis. The other two are sources that you find. And that could have been for today, or you can save the research for the weekend and have it for next time, whatever, right? Okay. In terms of the bibs themselves, all I'm really trying to do, I'm trying to force you guys into taking notes, because I know you guys don't do that. To be honest, you guys don't usually do that. And on this kind of a paper in particular, your job's way harder without notes, right? It's just too much to hold all in your head. So if you have a bib about Vonnegut, a bib about Jarvis, I'll use that as an example. You're writing those ideally thinking about how you would use those sources in this paper, okay? So I guess we'll start with Vonnegut because it's the biggest text and there's a bunch in it. You could not summarize like all the big ideas in Vonnegut in a bib, like there's too much. So you pick whichever ones you're interested in. Like maybe you would write a paper that talked a little bit about how masculinity is represented, but Lakita would not, right? That'd be fine because there's tons of stuff in that book to do that, okay? But your bib would look like that, and it would have those ideas represented. And then when it came to do the bib for Jarvis, you would primarily be looking for ideas that would connect to that in some way. Because all you're trying to do is kind of set yourself up to do that work we keep doing on the board with like all the texts lined up, right? And like making those connections. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Like,
Okay. Did that answer your question as well, Jackson? Or no? Do you have another question?
So yeah, I mean, so the first two that we're doing, are going to be from Slaughterhouse and Jarvis.
Hmm?
So does it matter what idea we pull from those? Like, does it have to be anything specific?
No, it's up to you. In my opinion, a lot of the things we've been highlighting in the past couple classes are some of the better ones in terms of they're central to the texts. They're probably more applicable because you're going to see them other places. With a question like that, it strikes me that you have something specific in mind. Like, what are you thinking of?
I mean, the masculinity one is good. I really like because in Jarvis she talks about dehumanizing like a lot.
Yeah, and with like how war does that. Yeah.
There's a lot to pull from. I think that'd be a really good thing to talk about.
For sure. But I mean, what I'm saying, so I mean, we talked about dehumanization, right? Like the other thing I would consider, and this isn't quite what you're asking, but when it comes to your bibs, because some people don't realize this, you don't have to use everything in your bibs. To be totally clear, you don't have to use anything in your bibs when it comes time to write your paper. Like, it's not a contract. It's meant to help you. But what I would also offer is you want to try to give yourself some options. So with your bib for Jarvis, if you want to talk about how she talks about dehumanization, she for sure does, okay? What I would recommend, I don't know that I would skew the entire bib toward that. You may only end up, when it comes to Jarvis, talking about dehumanization. That's totally fine. But you don't know that, right? And so a week or whatever from now, when you sit down to write the paper, I think it would just benefit you to have choices. And maybe you get to like the third page and you're like, I don't know what the fuck else to say. And you just have like this other quotation. You're like, I'm using that one. Right? That would be my recommendation. But it's in no way a requirement.
So pretty much the bibs are like a rough draft or like your idea point for the paper.
Yeah, so I mean it when I say they're notes.
It's like brainstorming kind of.
Maybe like an outline for your paper?
Yeah, well, because the only way I know to frame it is this, and then I'll come to you, Baxter. I'm sorry, I'm not going to keep doing that. It's very funny to me. It's only funny because you told me it bothers you, and that says more about me than it does you. Yeah, it's fucked up. It's not. All right, so they're notes because it's just so much to hold in your head, right? So if it helps you to think of like a pre-rough draft, because it for sure is, like it's like pre-writing a paper. And some of you will use them a lot, like you'll and this sometimes people get confused. Sometimes people get confused about this. With this kind of homework, you can straight up like copy and paste stuff that you come up with in your bibs if it works like that, right? But you also don't have to. You don't have to use them at all necessarily, but I think that would be a mistake. But yeah, it's a way for you to sit down with one text and go, here's the stuff I think works, here's the stuff I think is significant, and just have it in a single page. I didn't choose 500 words by accident. That's a single page. Like if I were in your position, I would print those out. I'd have 4 printed pages that I could just put on a table or something, and as I'm writing the paper, I can just go, all right, I'm using this one, and it makes it like, it just makes it so much easier to organize. And that's half the battle in this paper, is organization.
And I know that you had like 2 set quotes for the bibs. Are
Yeah.
you able to do multiple just for like, I guess to see if we have better ideas with one quotation than we do the other within our bibs? Are we limited to the 2 quotes?
No. You can do more than that. And I'll say this too, this is not me trying to be funny, but whatever you turn in for the bibs, I mean, do the assignment because it's homework and you want your grade. But if you just want to take more notes, you're also free to do that. You can, but I'm saying, like, what you're describing to me sounds like notes. You can do that.
I was about to put another quotation from
That's okay. Yeah.
after my 2.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say in the interest of homework, because I know we care about that in some regard, I would prefer that were extra. So what I mean is, you still have all the other parts of the bib, and then you have your 2 quotations, and like that's a bib, that's a whole bib. And if you want more beyond that, you can do that. Okay. You had a question. I thought I had another question over here too. Did I make that up? Sweet. Oh, after. Okay, after. Go ahead, Bryce.
So this I don't have to I can keep it casual is what you're saying when I'm typing it. I don't have to talk all formal.
We're worried about the tone of these bibs. Yeah, that's fine.
No, I'm just asking because you.
No, I appreciate it. Look, here's what I would tell you. It's a fine question to ask. It is funny, but I would say you're not required to be formal. You're not.
Okay.
However, if you think it's at all possible, you'll do that copy and paste thing even a little bit that I'm talking about. I would recommend it because you could run into where you just take something out and you don't really look at it, and you're just like, I'm gonna say some shit about this I don't know yet, it ends up in your paper, which wouldn't be great. So I'm just saying, you kind of have to think about your own process a little bit. But yeah, in terms of homework outside of rough draft stuff, that's fine. It's for you. It's the only way I can force you to work on stuff ahead of time.
So this is a big grade.
I mean, it's worth points. I think each round of bibs, and there's 2, I think they're worth 3 points each. And right now, you're making me remember numbers. I think you guys, your homework grade right now is 15 points or something.
Yeah, it is.
Look at that. Okay, so by this time next week, we'll have done both bibs. That'll be 6 points on top of that, which is not insignificant. It's more than a third, right? I'm not good at math, but I think that's true. So you want to do them? Okay. We had another question over here.
Yeah, so for our next 2,
Okay.
it has to be a article geared towards Slaughterhouse 5, right?
It doesn't have to be out about Slaughterhouse 5.
Oh, it doesn't, okay.
So, and we did this very quickly in the research crash course, and we focused on Slaughterhouse 5 because that makes the most sense. If I was starting research for this paper, that's where I would start. It makes all the sense in the world. However, it really depends upon what you think you're going to write about, what you've done in your other bibs. So I'm going to use you guys your example again. If your paper is more skewed toward masculinity, performances thereof, perspectives about it, whatever, the articles you looked at will be super different from what Lakita is talking about, because she wouldn't do that at all, right? You would find very different sources. And they could be about Slaughterhouse 5. They could be about totally other things, not about the book at all, right? So I'll say yes and no.
So if I was doing it on masculinity, I could
Sure.
go to the Ingram Library, type in masculinity.
You can. I mean, the only issue you run into there, we can do it real quick.
Yeah, because I did that same thing,
Yeah.
And it came up with like maybe one source, and that was it. Cause I like did it, I guess, more specific than I should have, but.
Found one source, that would be hella specific, because I have 820,000 right now. Were you logged in?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that'll be, if you live off campus, you gotta make sure to log in, it gets weird. We got down to 600,000. We want peer reviewed. All right. So we still have 330,000, which is a ton. It's way too many. What I'm telling you is you don't want to just look up a big idea like masculinity. That's huge, okay? You want to do one of these modifiers we talked about. So like masculinity and what's Slaughterhouse 5 about?
Violence.
Huh?
Violence.
We get a little more specific.
Yeah, I just see it up there.
Oh, okay. All right, so look, that cut that in half. That's still a ton, but we could kind of look, gender attitudes toward war and masculinities in Japan. I don't know how applicable that is. It might be. You know, no, it honestly could be. I mean, that's a very different culture than what gets examined in Slaughterhouse 5, but we're thinking about how sort of gender roles and perspectives, all that stuff shapes, you know, how we view or treat each other during war.
In Japan.
Yeah, but again, it could for sure be applicable. You just gotta kind of look around. Amputated men, colonial bureaucracy, and masculinity in post-World War colonial Nigeria.
What is it?
U.S. masculinity crisis, militarism and war. That for sure sounds applicable. Look at this. A nation's unstable gender identity, its predisposition to militarization and war. That is absolutely what Bonnie is thinking about. So you just gotta kind of look through some of these. Does that make sense? Okay. But when in doubt, get more specific. You could try other things. You said we had a menu here. Yeah. Violence, depression. I always hate psych papers. I know some of you like them because you're like you have a minor or something, but I fucking hate psych papers. But I don't know. There's gonna be different things. You gotta kind of root around. You gotta mess with your terms. Okay. I mean, the other thing we could try, you can always flip it. War and conflict. That's dumb. War and society could be interesting. I actually kind of wonder, I don't know if this will bring up anything. Huh.
About war and destiny.
That's what I was kind of trying to get at with free will, but yeah, whatever. Yeah, manifest destiny. I don't know. It's gonna be all manifest destiny. So you get kind of, sometimes you get tripped up by really popular phrasing. To give you a sneak preview, our third paper is about Die Hard, the movie. Oh, such a hard thing to look up sometimes because if you look up Die Hard, you're just gonna find that phrase in stuff that's not about anything, right? Like so. Anyway, so manifest destiny, like screw you trying to look that up a little bit. Free will or fate. Sometimes you gotta think of synonyms, but you just gotta mess around with your terms. I don't remember who answered. I don't even remember what the question was. Did that help?
Did our two articles have to be over Slaughterhouse 5?
They do not have to be. They for sure can be. But again, I would try to let ideas guide you rather than texts.
So pretty much we're taking what we are writing about, so whether it's destiny, faith, masculinity, or whatever, that is our general idea, and we're pulling things from Vonnegut, pulling things from Jarvis, and we're pulling things from two sources, and making it all.
And you want to kind of spider web them together.
Okay.
The only thing I would add to that is it's going to be hard to know at the start of the process, like whether or not you're going to have one general idea as you described. What's usually the case, I mean, you can have one overarching sort of whatever, but usually you have a lot of smaller ideas. So you might have a body paragraph on free will. You might have a body paragraph on how, masculinity, how it's represented or performed or whatever. It depends on the sources you have and how they kind of guide the discussion. The metaphor I always use too, it's like your four texts are for people in a conversation, and they're talking to each other. And if you really think about like a longer conversation, if you've ever been a part of one, they meander, right? They go different places, but they all kind of connect. They all kind of build off of different points that people make. That's what you're doing in this paper, okay? You're kind of telling me what that conversation looks like. I thought, did I have another? Yeah.
I have two. So the first
Okay.
one is, can we change our sources, like other two, if we put in an annotated bid? Like, can I go in the
Yeah.
can I change it?
No, your homework is never a contract.
Okay.
I mean, now, the caveat I would give you, any change you're gonna make like that, the earlier the better. Okay. Like at a certain point, like if it's, the paper's due in 2 days, I'll get emails. People are like, I think I want to use something totally different. I'm like, no. Like, not now. You can't, like, you got to do it now, right? The other thing I would say is, she distracts the shit out of me. It's not her fault. Anyway, I don't remember what I was going to say. God. Anyway.
I can go to the second question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the organization of the paper, I understand like the ideas. So
Mhm.
is it like a certain way you want us to do it? Like, is it possible for like all the ideas for just to be everyone agrees? Like, do we have to have a counter? Like, does something have to counter within the paper?
It doesn't have to.
Okay.
And depending on what the idea is, it'll be really hard for you to find something, right?
Yeah.
There are big ideas, generally speaking, we all kind of agree on. What I would say is, almost always though, even if sources agree, generally, there's going to be smaller aspects that again, they may not even necessarily disagree on, but like, this person makes this point, or says this, or this person doesn't even talk about that, doesn't even consider it, right? So that. It's hard to say that's a difference, but it kind of is, right? It's little nuances in it. So I would focus on those actually. Like in a paragraph, you can have an overarching idea, and we'll talk about this when we get to the paper itself, about all these sources generally think, you know, men perform masculinity, have to prove it, like in public, whatever. However, you know, when you start moving through the different sources, they talk about it in different ways. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? Sure.
Do, for the bibs,
Okay.
within the two quotes, does one quote need to be one side and the other quote need to be the, okay.
No.
Okay,
No. Again, the guiding star I would give you on a lot of questions like that, all I care about in your bibs is that it helps you write the paper. So if, however you're conceiving of the paper, that seems like a good idea, I mean, in general, I feel like it's not, but I could see a world where it is, then do that. But what I'm saying is, whatever helps you organize, figure out how to make the paper, that's what I want the bibs to be. Okay? Other questions? Great. All right. That took longer than I anticipated, but it's okay. What time is it? Good God. All right. Did you guys happen to open up the document I sent you? What's up?
What's the name
It should just bid workshop, just like a.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Here's what we want to do. We're going to do this kind of quick. We were always going to do it quick, but considering how long that took, we're going to do it quicker still. I just want to look at an example. Okay. This isn't going to be like a typical workshop. We're not really worried about how could this be better, blah, blah, blah. I want to look at what somebody turned in, and I want to sort of cover some of the ground we just covered with our questions, right? What are we doing as opposed to what are we meant to be doing, all that stuff, okay? So take a minute, read over it, we're going to talk about it. Does anybody need more time? Oh, you're good. All right. There's only 2 paragraphs. But I want to start at the very top because it's worth mentioning. This entry I don't think is quite right. I know that's because it's on course tip, and you don't have necessarily all the information available to you. We didn't talk about this much, if at all, with the last paper. I'm kind of worried we didn't, which is on me. But you go to the library. All right, this is the paper we're looking at. When you click on it, obviously there's the paper up there. Got a little bit of an abstract. We talked about that before. The other thing that I did not mention to you, you click on Cite over here. It's going to have all the citations. We, of course, are interested in MLA. We would copy and paste that bad boy into our bib and then eventually into our works cited page, right? The other thing I will tell you, just like we talked about with Easy Bib way back when, if you lift this from a web page, it's going to bring all the goofy formatting with it. So it'll have probably a gray background. There's things you got to fix. But the citation itself is perfect. So take it. What's up?
There's a paste slide whenever you go and paste it. I think it's clear formatting. Press that.
You can do that, and then but when you do that too, and that's a good catch, you got to go back and sometimes fix, like you'd have to then re-italicize this stuff. You got to check it. You got to check it, okay? But I wanted to let you know that's there for you for anything you find on Galileo, okay? All right, so the citation is mostly all right. That's not really what we're worried about. The first paragraph, pretty focused. Like if you guys could, in your own words, a sentence, explain what that first paragraph is about. What are we mostly concerned with when it comes to Jarvis? This whole good war, bad war thing, how Vonnegut is very interested in taking how people are thinking about Vietnam and saying, World War II wasn't that different, guys. We should revisit that, right? Like that's kind of, and they begin at the end to tie that into movies, how it's portrayed in film and stories. That's the whole paragraph. That's pretty good. Again, that's a huge sort of pillar in Jarvis's argument about the book. So that works. Okay? Second paragraph is also good. It's not an issue. I don't know what word I would use. But it almost reads like bullet points. So it's really quick. Okay? So I want to show you, first of all, she talks about not making the book entertaining, which we talked about last time, right? Like spoiling the climax, all that business. I'm going to try to break it off at different points. Then we talk about bodies, right? Something about being glamorous, which I'm not clear about. I'm going to ask you guys about that in a second. We have a really interesting thing about Billy here that we didn't much talk about. We sort of did. And then I think there's one more. All right, I want to talk about these in turn. So this first one is pretty easy. Can somebody break down for me that first point about spoiling the climax? What are we getting at when it comes to Vonnegut? Other than the climax, can we talk about it in a different way? I'm just curious. How does he do that? Not entertaining would be nicer, but I take your point. What's another way he does that? There's got to be another way you guys didn't much care for the book, right? How so?
Doesn't contradict
the jumbled mess that it is. Yeah. So he spoils the climax for sure, but he also doesn't build it in a way that's coherent. It's insane. The argument being, again, he was a well-established author at this time. Like, he was already famous. I don't think he just forgot how to write, you know? He's doing it on purpose. And that's like, why? Well, then that's where our argument comes in. He's trying to, ruin it in the way that we would normally expect a story. We would normally want to be entertained, because he's told us many times he doesn't want that. The point I'm making here is, you've taken what Jarvis says, I suppose about the climax or whatever, right? That's her point, okay? You connect it to some other element of Vonnegut, which works in a similar way, but it's also different. Does that make sense? That's a body paragraph, or at least the start to one, right there. Let's do it again. Something about bodies. I'm actually less clear on this. Vonnegut describes bodies in his book, talking about the Englishman. Something about war is not glamorous as the Englishmen make it out to be. I understand that last part. I'm not clear what that has to do with bodies.
It actually meant the physical differences in their bodies. Billy was tall and skinny.
Okay. Well then, all right. So connect that to the second half. Like, I just want to hear somebody do it. What is the physical sort of appearance of the Englishman have to do with this like glamorization of war?
Like when you think of like somebody that's been to war, they're probably like, ugh.
John Cena.
Yeah.
Type of, yeah.
Like slow it up a little bit.
Well, they look like an
Billy's
action
not.
hero.
Billy's not.
Yeah, Billy's not. None of the Americans are.
And they like Captain America. Like no one wanted to see that movie. It was just him being the skinny little shit he was in the beginning, all the way through.
It's when they give him drugs.
Yeah, we want to see him like tall.
That's my favorite part, actually. I've had students write about that movie before. They're like, it's all about American spirit. And it's like, it's about giving a guy drugs.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing is about pumping him full of drugs.
Honestly, I would probably take. I would take those drugs.
I'd for sure take it too. But my point is just like, what do we do in America if we can't like jump higher, swim faster? We fucking take drugs. Like it's anyway, different conversation. I'm high on coffee. I do apologize. I'm sorry. What were we talking about?
Bodies.
So they're the movie version, and like we talked about, Vonnegut tells us they haven't fought. They were captured early. They've been here for years. They're eating better than anyone else in Europe because the Red Cross accidentally hooked them up, and they kept it, which you can't necessarily blame them for. I mean, does it make them dirtbags? Kind of, but is it also understandable? Yeah. But the point is, they don't look like anybody who's been fighting because they haven't been, and they look more like the movie, and they're living and breathing, and the Germans adore them because of it, right? It's like living next door to an action movie. Like, it's so cool, right? But they're entertaining too. They put on plays. They're literal actors. Any of this stuff you could talk about here. And basically the point I'm making to you, because I think we're so quick that we don't explain all these. The bodies business is part of the point rather than the point itself, right? The point is their bodies are sort of meant to illustrate this idea that they're action heroes, that they're not realistic, because you compare the bodies to Billy and all the other Americans who are like borderline trashed, right? Because they've been at war. That's our second. Third point, I think there's only 4. I'm bad at counting. Yeah. Okay, so we kind of touched on this, but the quotation that the student pulls is interesting, so I want to consider it in a slightly different light. Jarvis says, Billy is forced to turn to the numbing, passive philosophies of the Tralfamadorians. They go on to explain, it ties in with So It Goes, and we talked about how, Billy ignores all the bad stuff, right? He just doesn't even see it. Everything beautiful and nothing hurt, that whole discussion. We know that's not true, but Billy buys into it so hardcore that he no longer knows it's true, right? He doesn't live according to our reality. He ignores so many things. This numbing business, though, this passivity, what about that? We didn't really, I don't know if we quite covered that, talking about Billy. What do you guys think about that? I mean, it's for sure true, right? But numbing especially, like, I don't know, just that word to me, like it sounds like it changes the conversation a little bit, I guess is the point I'm getting at, from how we talked about it. Being passive is one thing, being numb is another.
Almost like he developed an unhealthy coping mechanism. Like he takes
Yeah.
him like not caring to him like trying to not care.
Yeah, well, and it, I even like your verb, trying, just all on its own, like, it's sort of a chicken egg scenario, if you're familiar with the phrase. Does he become super passive and that's what makes him numb? Or does he numb himself and that makes him super passive, right? Because that's important. Like the way you describe it, it sounds like he gets this Tralfamadorian philosophy and he goes, that don't make me feel better. And so he buys in, and then that makes him sort of the way that we know him, right? Like super passive. Numb is another way to talk about, like, he has no empathy, he has no emotion at all, really. Except we see it occasionally. What's the only emotion you really see out of Billy? Very rare. When he's by himself, he doesn't show anybody. He cries when he's alone, in the dark. So he's clearly not okay, but he won't admit that to himself either, right? He's so sort of intentionally blind to even that he won't recognize it. What is clearly a problem? Like, you're crying alone in the dark. Like, you need to talk to somebody. You need help, right? Like he's not going to do that. He remains numb to his own.
Is that like the whole like intentional blinders thing that we were talking about this Tuesday?
Yeah. But again, the question here is that this kind of raises with how it's phrased. These are two distinct qualities of that intentional blindness. We kind of talked about it generally. And the point I'm stressing is, with this quotation, it's a great quotation, it kind of allows us to say, well, which one comes first? Because I don't know that they come together. It is a passive philosophy, but it's also numbing. And if we take it the way we described it a moment ago, if it's like a coping thing, which I think you could argue it is, well, then it says he ultimately becomes passive in all the ways that we think Billy is super passive as a result of coping, which is, of course, as a result of trauma, right? And you're attaching everything to that first, like, awful experiences that he had. You can talk about it the other way, but that would be a different argument. Does that make sense? I'm almost out of my mind on caffeine. Like, I am just trying to make sure. Okay. Fourth point. All right. So we have a quotation again. Jarvis expands our notions of bodies in and at war. On its own, I'm not clear quite what that means, okay? So we're going to table that for just a second. We're back to talking about the Englishman. They're interested in being strong, like a movie, so we talked about that. But then we get to a really interesting thing about Valencia. She uses, I don't know if I would say Billy's war memories, but either way, I don't know how else to put this. It like gets her going, is kind of what they're saying.
Use her fantasies about his.
That's maybe more accurate. Okay. Vonnegut once again reveals the power of self-generating. I think it's war narratives. Is it war victims? I'm asking you guys like you remember Jarvis on that level. I think it's narratives. But either way, with this especially, we talked about the Englishman already. What point are we making here about Valencia? And if the scene I'm pretty sure they're talking about is their honeymoon night. They do what folks tend to do on their honeymoon night, and it's horrible. Like, they're made into machines in like this really uncomfortable way. But then she says, like, they're laying there, and she's like, "Tell me about the war, Billy." And she says, like, "You know I'm proud of you, don't you?" And he goes, "What?" He goes, "Yeah," or whatever. Like, he's Billy about it. The point Jarvis is touching on, and we talked about this. What is Valencia doing? You kind of get the impression she considers Billy to be like what kind of a guy? the way she's talking to him about war and his stories, right?
It's like in her brain, like he is John Wayne. Like kind of like
Yeah.
just see him through like a lens of something that isn't really even there.
And we know two things immediately. One, we know that's not true because we've been with Billy and he ain't that at all. And then right here we learn she doesn't know anything about it. So he hasn't told her. Now again, he doesn't owe her that. We're not saying that. But she is completely in the dark. She has to be for her to think this about it. But that's her assumption. That's a really weird assumption, right? Like, especially given everything like, it's not like Billy is different when he gets home. He's the same dude. You look at that guy and you're like, hey, he was badass. He served our country. He's like, I don't know if he did anything ever. So what gives rise to that? What is informing Valencia's perspective in this moment? Because she hasn't been to war either. This is the 60s. Women couldn't go yet. There's only one thing.
What's your question?
Huh?
What did you ask?
What gives Valencia the idea that Billy was this like war hero?
I mean, just for the simple fact he win. Like, I mean,
And that's the story we have,
yeah.
right? And that of course ties into who in the book? Two people you could pick, but who's worried about the stories we have about war, the narratives we have about war? Mary. Valencia has seen these movies, or at the very least, they're in the kind of common sort of conversation that everybody has about this sort of thing. That's all she has to draw on, though, and we know she's wrong. But of course, she doesn't know that, and she married this guy, probably in some ways based upon that, right? That narrative. So we're talking more about the narrative and the effects thereof and how it touches people in ways that we don't even realize, okay? But we're also talking about how it can misinform, right? How it can shape whole relationships. Like they have a kid, right? They have a family based on, I hate to put it in these terms, but like a lie, if we're thinking about Billy, right? Like we're seeing the weird power of these narratives in this moment, which we could absolutely talk about. That's more than Mary says. Mary's worried about how it influences kids, and that is for sure something to talk about, right? But this is a different application. This is much more specific with like social narratives in general. Does that make sense? Great. Okay. I did that as fast as I could. I intentionally brought full grain coffee to, but I'm wondering if we went too fast. Like, do we have questions now, or do we anything at all in regards to this assignment or the paper or what you should be doing? Anything at all? Go for it.
When is the paper due? Is that a bad question?
When is the paper I want you to understand. It's not a bad question. But in context, we spent, probably an hour, 45 minutes. We spent 45 minutes talking about, like, really, you guys had some awesome questions. I think you even had a couple awesome questions, right?
Appreciate it.
You did.
Appreciate it.
And then at the end of that 45 minutes, you asked me something you could just look at. Like,
yeah, I mean, true, but like...
I know, but I mean, it's anticlimactic in the way that the book is, right? At the end of all this, I'm like, oh, we have one more question, let's get it. And you're like, when's this shit due?
He's trying to be poetic.
It just...
I believe, but I just want to know.
It's all right. No, I get it. It's a very practical question. It's fine, but I was not mentally prepared for that. And frankly, I don't know.
October 19th.
Thank you. I don't memorize that stuff. I use the syllabus all the time. Anytime I sit down and think about what we're going to talk about, I have the syllabus up and I look at it. That's very funny. All right. Any other questions?
You scared me, man. I thought like you just said.
No, it was just it honestly it took me down. It's all good. All right, so everybody feels better about this. Okay. Well, I mean that.
I feel like there's a real hole in my phone.
Okay. Well, if I can push on that for just a second, and then I'll start getting you guys out of here. Okay. You say somewhat, which is encouraging. Is there any particular thing you're still not sure about, or you still don't feel great about?
I don't know. It's just like my mind's going blank. Like I probably stared at a blank dot for like
Okay.
an hour last night because I just like it's a lot. Like,
Okay. Well, so a couple things, and you may not quite mean it this way, but I actually have a lot of training in this because this is a problem that writers have. Okay. It's called the blinking cursor. It's very intimidating. Blank page. It's very strong. It's very large. Especially when you think of all the things you have to do. What are all the things you have to do? You got to find 4 sources. I give you 2 of them. One of them is a fucking book, and one of them is an article you would never read in your life if I didn't make you. Right? Like so. It's intimidating. It's intimidating. What I would tell you, and this is a very old idea in writing. If you think about it for a second, maybe you guys didn't love reading the book. Can you imagine writing this book? He tells you he's thrown out thousands of pages. You know, like how much time it would take day after day after day to like write a book. And all I'm saying is the only way to do anything like that is small steps. Okay. So in your case, looking at a blank page doesn't help. I know this firsthand. Okay. Take the text you feel better about, which I would hope is Vonnegut and Jarvis, okay? Do bibs on those first. It will not be fun, but I think you can do it. Do one, take a break for like 20 minutes. Set an alarm, by the way. Like any of you out there who are brave enough to go, I'll come back to it, you won't. Like find a way. I shouldn't tell you this, but when I was your age, my reward was if I did a page, I'd have a cigarette. You shouldn't do that. Smoking is bad for you. But it was a great timer, because after it's done, I'd go do another page. Don't do that. But find something that's finite, that can break it up, because you need little breaks. You do, for your like sanity. But do one on Vonnegut or something. Take a break. Then do one on Jarvis. Then take another break. Maybe don't do anything else for that day, right? Do those in a day. Next day, you have those, you can go back and look at them. Now you can research based upon these 2 things that you actually have. See what I'm saying? And then you can you can find all kinds of things. But if you just take the enormity of it, it will swallow you. It will crush you. That's real. And that's writing across the board. Other questions? Yes?
This is unrelated.
Great.
The essay 1 revisions, did you already update or improve?
No.
Okay,
I hadn't even looked at them, to be honest with you.
Okay. My grade hadn't changed, I just want to make sure.
No, that's fair. I got all caught up on homework today. For like 3 hours, I graded homework this morning. You want to talk about the worst day of your life? It's pretty high up there. But it's coming. I need to get to them soon because my 1101s are turning in papers tomorrow, actually. So I got to figure that out. But I'll let you guys know. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna go down kind of what we have coming up, and then we'll get out of here. You have bibs due today. This is one of those This is one of the first like real assignments. Up till now, it is like a paragraph type of thing. It's not terribly difficult. This is the first really involved one. So I understand they won't all be in like before class. Okay, what I would tell you is, getting them in, whether they're late or not, is better than not doing them at all. Both in terms of your grade, which I know is what you care about, and also in terms of whatever you're going to do on the paper. Like, it's going to make your lives easier. I know this, okay? So if you have not done them, and quite honestly, most of you have not, do them. Do 2. I intentionally break it up, by the way. 2 is not fun. It's way more fun than doing 4 at once. Do 2. Get them turned in the next 24 hours or something, right? Make that happen. give yourself a break, and then sometime over the weekend or sometime before we reconvene, do those other 2. Get it under your belt. Future you will appreciate it. I promise you this. Okay? I'm going to try to get to the revisions whenever I can. I haven't even opened it. I don't even know how many of you did it. I'm kind of scared about that, actually. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. Do the bibs. After that, we'll start on the paper. Sweet. I'll see you next week. Thank you, guys.